the people of God together say amen. There are very few people that you will meet in life who have the combination of characteristics that Dr. Asa Hilliard has. A man whose intellectual capacity is gargantuan, who knows so much it will leave you breathless just to listen to him talk about any one of dozens of subjects, from sociology through psychology, through Medu Neter, through the ancient Nile civilizations, through the political climate of the world, different countries, different cultures, through Africans in the diaspora to Africans on the continent. A man whose intellectual genius does not get in the way of his faith, and whose faith does not cause him to have blind spots when it comes to learning and to disseminating knowledge. A man who is just as at home talking with persons who practice traditional African religions, Muslims, Jews, Christians, sanctified folk, frozen, chosen, doesn't matter. He does not judge. He loves all of human beings, and that's hard to find. That is very hard to find in terms of a man with that kind of a mind, or a woman with that kind of a mind, who is not judgmental, but who loves all of God's children. Won't you please put your hand together and welcome back to Trinity United Church of Christ our friend, our brother, our teacher, Dr. Asa Hillard.
Good afternoon. This is a great honor for me always to have a chance to come to this church. I don't know how the members stand it every Sunday. It's just, I have to go and lay back in the hotel, get on the pillow, and just absorb all the blessings that I got in the morning service. And so I'm not sure what I'm going to say this afternoon. But I do want to say that it's a real special pleasure for both my wife and I to be able to come to Trinity. And if we could spread the word all over this nation and the world, we would do it. And in fact, we do it for reasons that those of you who come here know. Also, my mother told me that I always had to ask for help when I try to make presentations. So I'm going to ask for your help to do what Ptahhotep said. He says he hopes that his heart and his tongue match, and that his lips are straight when he speaks. We know that in the Christian faith is let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in the sight of God, the strength and the Redeemer. So I say that because my mother is a minister, sanctified minister, 92 years old. And her greatest disappointment is that her son didn't follow in her footsteps as a minister. But since I said, well, I followed my dad, he was a teacher. I said, but my ministry is teaching. So she's not quite satisfied with that, but she's given me her blessings anyway. So I try to follow as much as I can. So that's one of the things that I wanted to say at the outset. The second thing is that my work is teaching foremost. In addition to that, I'm a psychologist, and I got into psychology in order to teach better. Then I got into history. So my combination is teaching, psychology, and history. And there's a reason for that. When I went to my doctor last week for my physical, I take an annual physical as I'm supposed to. And my doctor didn't say anything about anything that was bothering me. My diabetes, for example. He didn't say anything about that until he found out who I was. He had to ask me questions before he gave me medicine. And he had to ask questions in two ways. One, he had to ask me questions that I might not be able to answer, even if I wanted to answer straight, which meant he had his lab assistant stick needles in me and pull blood, and then look at the blood pressure and things like that. And that's part of who I am. And then he asked me a lot of questions. Are you allergic to anything? Are you allergic to penicillin? Are you allergic to this, that, and the other? So he wouldn't just start treating me unless he knew who I was. That's how I think we have to approach teaching and learning. We have to know who our people are. We have to know who we are, or else we won't be able to do this job. So you will hear in the presentation this afternoon quite a few things, because I'm going to try to brush past several different topics. But you will hear some teaching, you will hear some psychology, and you will hear some history, because I can't do psychology without history, and I can't do teaching without both psychology and history. And I want to blend with some of the things that I heard this morning that Reverend Wright was talking about, and that's not what I want. See, I got a little folder down here that says Trinity. That's us. I got several things in that folder, which is I got 5 topics and a couple of holdovers. And then inside each one of these folders, I got, except for the first one, more than one topic. All of those are little PowerPoints that I want to try to get through. I don't know whether I'm going to be successful or not. In order to talk about some of the things that were being said about where we stand, whether we want to go back to Egypt, as it were, what Reverend Wright was talking about, whether you want to go back to captivity, because many of us are still in captivity. Some of us are free but don't know we're free, and want to go back even though we may know that we're free, because we can't stand freedom. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we got to be that way and what a better outcome would look like by looking at history, some geopolitics, and a few other things. So I'll start off with the very first, that has to do with jumping in the middle of our history. Most of you who know me know that most of the time what I do is talk about Egypt a lot. I got pushed back to Egypt studying IQ testing, because I got interested in when did white people first begin to think that black people were stupid. And I found out that it wasn't too long ago that they thought the opposite. They thought we were geniuses, and that they begged to come and learn from us. They were delighted to be included in our school, to sit at the feet of our learned professors. And then, of course, I began to wonder, when did that start? And it got all the way back to Nile Valley civilization. So I'm not starting there. I have one PowerPoint where I'll dip into that. But I'm starting way up in the middle to look at a piece of history. And then, as I do this, I want to point out that even though what I'm getting ready to show you has been around, the fruits of the work of Joel Rogers for 40 years, 50 years, one of the most traveled Africans in the world. He's got books, Sex and Race, volumes 1, 2, 3, Nature Knows No Color Line. He's got one on African world history and everything. He does a lot of work. He was a Pullman porter, by the way, which probably had something to do with the quality of his scholarship. If he had gone the other way, he would be stupid. Gotten a PhD at the University of Chicago, he'd probably be stupid. Because he would not know what questions to ask. He would ask only the approved questions. So he began to do it a different way. He was not hemmed in by his education. Not putting down education. You ought to get all you can. But you ought to come out whole if you get an education. So I put this little thing together just by taking pages out of Joel Rogers' books about the African presence in European royalty. And this is the documentation for that. And so it won't take me but about 5 minutes to go through this little piece. That's why I can show several of these PowerPoints and the time I have available with you. And this is, notice the date, from the 7th century AD. And for those of you who are taking notes, and anybody who comes to a teacher ought to have a pencil and paper, as Bishop Pryor said. And because you'll want some references. And the reference that you want to get for this is MacRitchie's book, Ancient and Modern Britons. And then you want Joel Rogers' books, Nature Knows No Color Line. And so let's see if we can... You also want Ivan Van Sertima's book, I should have told you, The Golden Age of the Moor. The Golden Age of the Moor. If you're trying to find the African presence in Europe, you need to know the name that Africans were called by Europeans. And then we already know what color we're looking for if you're looking for phenotype. And so where would you go to find records of the color of the people who were in Europe between the 7th century and up to now? A couple sources of information could be the images in the royal family registry. Royal families are registered in many eras of European history. They have family crests with the names of the family and the images, in some cases, of the family on those crests. Another place would be to the language. Sometimes the language tells you in the language, and what Joel Rogers did was combine the language and the images and what he knew about history and the time to locate African people in the history of Europe. And so these are some of the images that he came up with. These are Moors. And if you look at the Moors, you'll see down here is in the 17th century, right here, 1631 to 1672, Africans playing chess with a white servant from Europe. Africans playing chess with a white servant from Europe. They're up there in Spain and in Portugal. Why? Because from the 7th century up until 1492, Moors dominated southern Europe. They dominated Spain and Portugal, but they spilled over into Germany, Scandinavia, France, and all those other places too, and left their tracks in the records. And here are some of the family crests that Joel Rogers found. Negroes in coats of arms of noble families. Deliberately didn't pick anybody who was just up there on a short vacation. Somebody who was laying in the gutter because they didn't have a job. These are the people who were in the royal families of Europe. If you were registered, then you were a person of mean. And these are Africans, as you can see their faces, they're black. And if you look here, this is Mora's son of the Moor. In other words, the name is Moor. My wife's name is Morrison, son of the Moor. And my brother's name is Maurice, Little Moor. Somebody say I got to get out the way. Little Moor. So here are all these names, that's the language, and the names contain in them references to the Moorish people who were present in Europe, and the images in the register contain the faces of the Moors. Now, what made a Pullman porter think to go and collect over 500 of these images out of the registers of France, Germany, England, Scotland, Spain, Portugal, and so forth to document the presence over the course of hundreds of years? Again, from the 7th century, that's the time when you pick it up from the Scotchman who writes about Africans on ships who sail from Africa into Scandinavia and then intermarried into the royal family. So some of the names that we think are Irish names, for example, like MacRitchie, are actually names of African families that married into Irish families. And these are, if you can, it's too small, I think, for those way back in the back, but almost every name up here that has a black face also has some version of the name Moore. Morian, Maury, Morian, Morier, Moorbird, Mormont, Morin, Moringer, Morini, Morici, Moriana, Mori. So who was it that was freed up enough in the mind to know to go look for these things that had those kind of commonalities, other than a Pullman porter who hadn't been to school? Thank God. Negroes in the coats of arms, and I'm going to skip through these because if you want to, you can pick up the books. Sex and Race, Volume 2. This happens to be German, and what happens to the name in Germany? It now is Moore, but now it has the German spelling, M-O-H-R, Moore. And then in a minute, I'll have another one that will be very familiar to you. These are German again. These are French, Dutch, and Belgian names where the people are named Moore. And these are, see, the names of these families, except one, are all of African ancestry. Again, the names and the images. The French, Indian, and Spanish and Polish names. Can't hear me? Okay, can you hear me better now? All right, thank you. I learned how to work with high technology. German, Central Europe. In the course of doing this, he also ran into Queen Charlotte Sophia, who is the girlfriend of George III, but the grandmother of Queen Victoria. And if you happen to come from Charlotte, South Carolina, this is the queen for whom that city was named, an African woman in Europe. And this is another two images, or actually one image with an enlarged inset of Charlotte Sophia. I was trying to get to some of the German names before we stop this particular one. Okay, here's one here, Schwartz. In German, that's the name black, just like Moore is the name black in Spanish or in Portuguese. Schwartz in German means black. Schwarzkopf means black head. Schwarzenegger means black on black. Because Schwartz means black and Neger means black. And then when you find Schwartz and you find Neger, you'll find a black face and a family crest attesting to the fact that the Moors were in Germany, in Spain, in Scandinavia, in all those places. Right, Hunter? I thought I saw Hunter. That's my other buddy. I did that last time too, didn't I? Okay. I was looking. Hunter Adams usually comes out here, and some of you know him. I'd be surprised if he wasn't here today. His mother comes here too, doesn't she? She's a member of this church. This is the brother, last one, who was one of the knights. Brother used to make jokes about this. You know, in the days of the knights, I forget who was it, one of the comedians. In the days of the knights, there must have been some black knights. Well, there were, and here's one of the black knights, and his, in this case, European lady. And this is coming out of the registries of royalty in Europe. Okay, the point is, I hear people talking about the fact that they are mixed. Is it mixed with what? Well, mother was Irish, daddy was British, granddaddy was German or something like that. But the question is, who were the British, the Irish, and the Germans? Because some of them were mixed with the Africans before you got mixed with the ones that you think are pure. Plus, the first ones weren't pure because they were Africans. The first Europeans were Africans, if you want to go all the way back. And then they got bleached out because of the environmental conditions that they're living in. Again, that's not the mindset that we have. And I'm talking about mindset. That's why I'm raising these issues. And it shapes the way we define problems. It shapes the way we define who we are. So let's come out of this and let's go to the second topic. And that is, we could go back and find out who we were as royals in Africa, then royals in Europe. We could go back and find out as creators of civilization, it was mentioned earlier. That's who we were. We could go back and talk about having in Timbuktu right now the remnants of libraries, and you have contained in the Timbuktu library at Sankara University 18,000 manuscripts now, 80,000 manuscripts in the houses of the people who live in Timbuktu. These are the families of the professors who have saved their books, their family library. Those books didn't get into the archives. And you have 1 million books like that in the nation of Mali. Now that's who we were when we were rudely interrupted by slavery and colonization. But that's not who we think we are now, because most of us don't go back before 1492. And our greatest university in West Africa, Timbuktu and Jenne, Gawa, and other places in Nigeria, Sokoto, these places that had world-class universities, some of them were operating at the peak of the slave trade. So then you had to propagandize to take Africans off the throne. That's point number 2. That there is a culture war that was declared unilaterally by people who wanted to destroy African people. They knew the only way to do it was to take away the tie that bound them together. Now, if you accept that, then what's the remedy for freedom? How do you get your strength back? If taking culture away was to destroy your strength, how do you get it back? Sankofa, go back and get it again. Can you go back and get it again? You can if you want to, but you have to want to. So we have, right now, this is a real fast one, some of the different ways that we vilify, demonize, minimize African people. Sometimes it's just entertainment. It's not just entertainment. The people who work in Hollywood are very sophisticated. They know what messages sell, and they know what messages destroy, and they do both. This is King Kong. And this is how many times that King Kong has been made. At least 3 that I know of. Always some huge, black, wild thing that's after this little, meek, white thing. And then, of course, they have to kill him. And then in King Kong, if you sat through the whole thing this time, a very telling line is saying, you know, what killed him wasn't the bullets. What killed him was the love of this white woman. Then they also said this. I know most people sit through and don't pay attention to what's being said. You watch the entertainment. What they also said, he was a king in his own country, but now he is our captive. That's the end of the movie. That's the conclusion. That's what the movie is supposed to be all about. Now, King Kong has a brother. Some of you remember this one. And they kind of tame him. You remember this? The Mighty Joe Young. Again, something, go back, you anthropologists, and look at the movies and do a critical read the movies. Read when millions of little bitty black things like bees gang up and eat up lots of little bitty white things, little white people. Like black rats by the millions invading and taking over. These things are symbolic. They're not just accidentally chosen. And I actually have on a video a video on my laptop I won't be able to show about the bees with Richard Whitmark, as these bees start out being African killer bees. And then halfway through the movie, they're just the Africans are coming. And then the Africans are the most killing of all the versions of the bees. And then, of course, the way you get rid of these African killer bees is through their culture. And so what you do, if you saw the end of that movie, is that they played around until they found out that there were sounds of an alarm system that mimicked the mating call of the young bees. And that if they played that sound, they could get the bees to come to the place to mate. So they decided that they would take the culture of the bees, this music, and then they would take a float and they would put a boombox on a float that would play the music of the bees that would call the bees together. And then they would put gasoline around the float. And then when the bees congregated to do their dance at their music, then they would light the fire, and after they clustered them all together, kill them all, using their culture to kill them. Now, if I played the segments for you and you heard what the dialogue was, it's spattered throughout the film. So unless you do what I did, which is to catch the dialogue where they were talking descriptively about the bees, you might not even notice that they had called these bees Africans. You might not notice that they stopped calling them bees and start calling them African. In Houston, by tomorrow, there'll be no more Africans here. Not no more bees, no more Africans in Houston. And they came up through Brazil and up through the Caribbean, and they breed all over the place. And we thought they were our friends. Okay, we'll come out of Mighty Joe Young. I'm into that section that's dealing with the systematic deformation of the African, in this case, the phenotype. Very quickly. Sometimes it helps to put all of these things together. This is the target of the black preacher. And you have to look at what they're doing to this image. It's not just that he is a caricature, but what his message is about is trivialized, and he's made ignorant. You know, one of the most powerful forces in the community, your teachers, your preachers, your physicians, and so forth. And in a moment you'll see one where they attack the physicians too. This was, by the way, when black people wouldn't play the part the way it was supposed to be played, they get white people to put on burnt cork and play the part for us. This is Al Jolson in blackface, playing the part of black people, playing the role that they wanted to project about black people. This was interesting. Grandpap's embarrassment. Grandfather can't read, so the little girl who can read gets a chance to embarrass the elder who can't read. Al Jolson again, Step and Fetch It. By now, Africans, in order to play movie roles, after white people had started copying African people, had to put on blackface to play black parts, even if they were already black. This is socializing the population to accept an inferior position for black people. This is the attack on the black medical men. Look at the tools that the doctors have in the cartoon. One's got a saw, one's got a hammer and a hatchet, one's got pliers. Those are the surgical tools. And you could just say, well, it's nothing but entertainment. But 24/7, day after day, week after week, every venue, cartoons, entertainment, movies, and so forth. This one says, run along, Sonny, I didn't order no coal. Look at this. These are all postcards that went through the United States mail, the ones I've been showing you now. In other words, it's not that any one thing happened, it's millions of things happen constantly, over and over and over, to destroy the image of African people. And one more in this section, which looks not just at the cartoons, but at the media in general. Now, if we had the time, I would, in fact, what I'm going to do is make a DVD before I leave of what you're getting ready to see on this one, and I'm going to leave it with Reverend Wright, because what this has is a lot of book titles, and you're not going to be able to copy them down fast enough. But the reason I want to put the book titles up is to show how much systematic work has been done trying to do what I just got through doing, which is simply analyzing what messages are being sent here. What is the intensity of these messages? What are the consequences of having these messages sent over and over and over again? How do you manipulate media? And so everything from advertisement, like down here, Slave in a Box, Aunt Jemima, all the years that we had Aunt Jemima, the use of the watermelon, of course, all of the little gimmicks, and of course this book, which then produced a film, Birth of a Nation, was a model after this book by Ivan Dixon, The Klansman. I'd like to pick out of this, you really ought to look at this on Fox News, since we got about 90% of our people addicted to that channel. Fox started out by showing more black people than almost any other station. But then you have to ask, what is Fox's message? Not just who gets a job and who gets entertained, but what is Fox's message? You don't have to do the work. You can do the work, but people have done this work, and that particular book is one that I recommend you get in order to get an appreciation for what I'm trying to share with you right now. And there's a whole host of others. As I said, I'm going to make a copy of this DVD, so you'll be able on a DVD, so you'll be able to get a copy of this PowerPoint if you want it. These are just enormous numbers of books that have done incredible things. Like this one here, The Colonizing Camera. And it goes through things like National Geographic and all the images of African people that are put, and what types of images. What are the rules for choosing and placing images of African people? Again, the homework has already been done, and once you see that homework, some of you who are inclined to do this kind of work will want to continue and amplify that work. And this is I have maybe 100 books like this that deal with the analysis of the use of images against African people. And then let's go to the Okay, the third thing I want to do is to look a little bit more explicitly at this term, culture war. Culture war. I said it was unilaterally declared. We didn't declare war against anybody else. Somebody declared war against us. And the war they declared was not just a military war. The war that they declared was a culture war. And I want to look a little bit more explicitly at that just for a moment. Anybody know what that image is, by the way? It's something that your children ought to look at very carefully and learn all that you can about this image. This image that's on the screen right now. That's actually a part, and you can go on the web if you got your computer set up at home and type in M42 and astronomy. And then let it bring up for you the Orion Nebula. That is that section of the sky that Africans in the Niger and Africans in the Nile Valley used as their focal point for understanding nature and for understanding spirituality and understanding the measurements of astronomy and the use of mathematics and a lot of other things. That particular section of the sky is actually a thing of beauty. And if you examine some of the legends about that particular section of the sky, that's also quite beautiful. M42, that's the name of the constellation in numbers, but they call it, you can also type in Orion Constellation or Orion Nebula. Okay, I'm saying coming from a deeply spiritual center to the point of colonization and enslavement and segregation and now white supremacy ideology, which never went to bed, by the way. Our young people think that was back in the day. And they think it was back in the day because you don't see the signs that say white-only drinking fountain. But you see Katrina. You saw those people up on top of those roofs up there for a week, and that we can go all the way to Iraq and we can save those people. But somebody said they fired some 45 caliber pistols, and the whole army and the National Guard and the police force all supposedly stood down because they were afraid to go in and save the diabetics on the roof. That's where we stand, and our people don't know it. And because they don't know it, are not mobilizing to work for their own protection. And so the reason they don't know it is the culture war took the soul out of the community that binds it together. And it went from what Moynihan said years ago, benign neglect, to malignant attention. Malignant attention is systematic geopolitical intent. That is the intent to control the world. Go home tonight and type in PNAC, Project for a New American Century. Then type on the tab that tells you who the board is for the Project for a New American Century. Then type on the lesson plan. It's called Position Papers of the Project for a New American Century, where they talk about how they intend to take over and rule the world and call it democracy. So I say, what is geopolitics? That means global power. The attempt to take global power, and it's calculating domination, that we don't wind up on the bottom by accident, that somebody designed a way to put us on the bottom. What somebody are we talking about? These people have names, they have lesson plans, they have foundations, they have things that they do on a daily basis. They do not rest, and they are working today even better and in a more sophisticated way than they ever worked before. It's not back in the day, it's right now. This happens to be a collection of the books on how they intended to get rid of Indians and to nullify their resistance on the continent. First is on the Australian continent in the upper left-hand corner, the rabbit-proof fence. Anyone seen the rabbit-proof fence? Okay, is that worth seeing? 3 little girls. And what was the strategy for native population? Take the children away from the parents. Never let the parents raise their own children. In the case of the Australian Aborigines, send these 3 little girls 1,000 miles from their families so the families can't raise them and tell them what's right, wrong, good, bad, true, and false. And these little girls found their way home. 2 of them actually walked 1,000 miles, guided by a fence they used to keep rabbits from running across the country. That fence was the guiding fence, and that actually became the fence their parents, when they heard they were coming, they would knock on the fence and send vibrations on the fence so that they could talk to the girls through the fence. This is the resilience of the population that's being dominated. It's something that our children ought to know these stories. And then, of course, all the rest are about, except one, are about the Native Americans in the United States. This is education for extinction, that you actually have think tanks that sit down and decide how to teach Indians so that Indians cannot resist you. This one, here's a man here. This is how he looked when he went to school, and this is how he looked when he finished. Because they went to boarding schools. They went to boarding schools 2 and 3 states away. If they lived in Georgia, Creek Indian, send them up to Virginia to boarding school so that somebody other than an Indian parent can raise them. Do you know that that strategy is being worked in Chicago right now? It's being worked in Atlanta right now. But what does it look like? It looks like this. Corporations are coming in, getting major contracts in urban areas to raise your children for you, and parent involvement is non-existent. Leadership in the African community is non-existent because the corporations have contracts for, and they want hundreds of schools to make profits. education maintenance organization, and you call it school reform. It's the same thing they were doing. It's genocide. It's what it is. We're not ready for it because we think it was back in the day. This is Afro-Argentinians of Buenos Aires, how they took the culture away from the Argentinian Africans. The Africans were in Argentina. Used to be 30% of Buenos Aires. Now when you go and ask where are the Africans, they say no hay negros en Buenos Aires. We don't have any black people in Buenos Aires. Well, you had 30%, and in 100 years' time, nothing. What happened to them? That's the story. You want to know the answer to the question I just asked. What happened to the Afro-Argentinians of Buenos Aires? You also want to know the story, what happened to the ones in Brazil? Brazil is right now close to 70% African, but most of the Africans don't know they're African in Brazil. Lies Across America. These are some books you ought to read. The Curriculum of Domination, How You Tell Lies. Abraham Lincoln was an honest man who freed the slave. He never freed one. Read a book, Lerone Bennett's book, Forced into Glory. 15 years to make a book about Abraham Lincoln, and the average African hadn't read it yet. 15 years of his life to tell the truth on Honest Abe, so that you won't be going up having civil rights marches in between his knees, thanking the father for the white supremacist father for freeing you when he never did. Forced into Glory. Lerone Bennett, one of your great historians right out of Chicago right here. Sundown Towns. This just came out. The towns where they used to say, back in the day, nigga, read and run, can't read, run anyhow. Out of town by sundown. Did you know they still have sundown towns in the United States? This is the documentation of the old ones and the new ones by the same man who wrote Lies Across America and Lies My Teacher Told Me. Okay, here's what I want to get to now. This really is the main reason that I gave the preamble that I gave. Because this is where we stand now. This is a book that was written by the man who advised George Bush after 9/11. Harvard professor, Huntington. Clash of civilizations. 3 civilizations, according to Huntington, run the world. Asians, Islamic, and European. You thought that meant Christian. No, that's the Christian cross that they hijacked, just like they hijacked it in the Crusades, just like they hijacked it in the Inquisition. They operated in the name of Christianity, but they were not Christians. And so this sign means Europe. So if you read it Christian, you got it wrong. Just because most of them claim Christianity doesn't mean they're Christian. So they say that there's 3 groups of people that are struggling for power to run the world. That's what this man said. And this is what he said. The most important distinctions among people are not ideological. That means communists and capitalists. Because one night they're fighting each other. The next day, those cousins are together against you. He said that's not really what's important. It's not even Democrat and Republican. It's not capitalist and socialist. It is cultural. That's what holds groups together. You saw that with the culture war. If you want to destroy black people, destroy their culture. You want to destroy Indian people, destroy the culture. You want to destroy Japanese people, destroy the culture. So this man says, George Bush, if you want to take over the Muslim oil countries in the Middle East, then what you got to do is unravel the core culture, in this case religion, that ties those Muslims together. That's what he said, in effect. He said people define themselves in terms of ancestry, religion, language, history, values, and custom. How are we taught to define ourselves? As minorities? Not in terms of history and culture. We're taught to define ourselves in terms of how many we are. We're taught to define ourselves in terms of whether we are oppressed or not. We are the oppressed. We are a minority. We're taught to define ourselves in terms of whether we are at risk or not. In other words, the names that we get destroy the opportunity for us even to reflect on what it is that holds us together in the first place. But they know. But look, the people who are running the world, this man is in the inner sanctum of the people. Rumsfeld, all of those people who are running the world, this man is in their camp at the Heritage Foundation and at Harvard University. Continuing, he said, the concept of universal civilization helps justify Western cultural dominance of other societies and the need for those societies to ape Western practices and institutions. So the idea that there is a universal culture that's good for everybody in the world is the political tool used by people who intend to control everything, and then they'll call that democracy. Y'all still with me? We got a couple more books here. Because see, what I'm trying to do is let people speak for themselves, not to characterize what they say, but let them say to you what they're saying behind your back. Actually, it's not behind your back because they publish. All this is published work. That's how they hide it from us. They put it in books. Now, some of them tell us that, look, the reason Africa has got to become European is so it can be modern. But this man says modernization does not necessarily mean westernization. Non-Western societies can modernize, have modernized, without abandoning their culture. In fundamental ways, the world is becoming more modern and less Western. So the idea that you can't learn how to do computers and that you can't learn how to do technology in its most sophisticated form unless you stop being Zulus, unless you stop being Nigerian, Igbos and Hausas and Mindi people. If you stop that, then you can learn how to do it. Oh no. One of the greatest computer minds in the world is a man out of Nigeria. One of the men who is the greatest scientist in the world, solved 3 of the most technical problems in 3 separate fields. Oyibo solved the problem that Einstein couldn't solve in physics, solved the problem in aeronautics, solved the problem in mathematics, nominated for the Nobel Prize and didn't get it. He's Nigerian, still a Nigerian, and wrote a paper about the need for maintaining the culture of Nigeria at the same time. Sure, you can speak English and speak 50 languages, but why give up your own? The second book, please read this one, Tribes. It's just like the first book. This man is a newspaper reporter in California, but he says there are 5 groups running the world, not 3. And he calls them tribes, not civilization. Jews, British, Japanese, Chinese, and Indians. How come they can run the world? Notice no Africans are up there yet, right? Somebody think they were forgotten, and that's the only reason they're not up there? No, they're not up there because they're not in the game. And they're also up there because they don't know a game is being played. And it's a little hard to get in the game, and you don't know that the game is being played, where the game is, and then walk in, what are the rules of this game? And here are part of them. Why are those people able to run the world? Look, a strong ethnic identity, mutual trust because they know they belong to each other. Mutual trust because they know that they belong to each other allows them to work collectively as a group. We're always sitting up talking about why don't we have more unity in the community? Everybody knows why but us. The people who have unity don't integrate themselves out of existence. See? How do we get that as an agenda? To disappear as a family. Yes, desegregate, but integration means you stop being who you are. Why do I have to stop being who I am just for you to stop telling me I can't live where I want? See, we get conceptual confusion. I'm going to skip that one. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going to go back and get it. I have to say something about this. A few years ago, some scholars, in this case Winkler, wrote about how the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment of the Humanities, they wrote the history of that. In keeping with my topic, what does that history mean? Do you think that somebody just needed artwork for their house, and that's why they're paying people to be artists, paying people to write books, paying people to write novels? No. Look, the desire to promote a unique national culture heavily shaped the creation of those endowments. In the 19th century, they said Americans were afraid the United States is too young, too egalitarian, too tied up with business, so they cannot create a high culture. So here you have all these cowboys out here in the West with no culture. And they're getting self-conscious because France got a culture, England got a culture, German got a culture. So what did they do? They say, let's go to the university and apply our Rent-A-Scholar program. So they went to Phi Beta Kappa, the National Council of Learned Society, said, make up an American culture. That's what they did. So why? So we can have the political unity that we need and the self-esteem that we need in order to compete with the aged civilizations of the world. Anyone ever heard about that report before? And why they did? Why do we have the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for Humanity? Well, try to go get something funded that raises the issue of African culture and see what happened. Ask Ali Missouri what happened when he had 8 programs funded for television, 8 half-hour programs, and they only let him show 4. And the current wife of President Cheney, Lynn Cheney, was then head of the National Endowment for the Humanities, where he had applied to get the money to, and in fact had been granted the money. That's where the thing was funded. And then she stopped the series and went to the Congress and beat up on him in Congress. Why? Because Africans were getting their cultural mind back together again. When I say these people who are running things know exactly what the power of culture is, that's what I mean. Y'all still with me? I got another one here now. The big bad boy is coming up. This is the most brilliant of all of them. That one. This is the bad boy here. This was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, Brzezinski. This one does not come from the right. He comes from the left. Remember what I said earlier? 2 cousins get to fight, and then both of them get together and agree on their agenda. So this is written in 1995, this book. This is before, I might add, 9/11. I have to tell you that because you're going to think it came after 9/11 as soon as you see what he got to say. I also want you to pay attention to what he says about Africa in here, because several of these books mention Africa, but you don't want to know what they say. Okay, the Grand Chessboard. And look at the subtitle, American Primacy and its Geostrategic Imperative. What does that mean? American primacy. That means domination of what? The world. Now you can go out in the UN and make speeches about democracy. Isn't that what Bush is doing all this? Aren't we taking democracy to Iraq? That's not what they're saying in the back room. That's not what they're saying in Clash of Civilization. They're saying take over that sucker. But here, the Grand Chessboard, Brzezinski, Carter's national security advisor. Eurasia is the chessboard on which the struggle for global primacy continues to be played. And that struggle involved geostrategy and the strategic management of geopolitical interests. It is imperative that no Eurasian challenger emerges. Let's stop for a second. He's not up and running. He does not possess weapons of mass destruction. In fact, he has nothing. But it's possible that he might have something, and that if he has something, it's possible that he might want to keep it. And if he might want to keep it, he might want to fight to keep it. So keep him from even waking up to think about the fact that he might want to think about it and later do something about it. That's called preemptive war. That's what was being argued for. Okay? So it is imperative that no Eurasian challenger emerges who's capable of dominating not America, but capable of dominating Eurasia. And thus, if they dominate themselves, they could challenge America. Challenge America what? To keep them off their oil. That's the challenge they're talking about. They're not talking about over here at the Empire State Building. There's Hunter. I knew. See, I told you Hunter's going to be up in here. All right. The formation of a comprehensive integrated Eurasian geostrategy is therefore the purpose of this book. So he wrote a book about how to take over the world. Now, you would think that they would talk about weapons of mass destruction. You know the rule in the world today, the new geopolitical rule that only white people can have weapons of mass destruction. That's the rule. If you haven't, try that out anywhere. See who has them and who doesn't have them, and then see who can get them and who can't get them. And all you have to do is draw a color line. That tells you who can have it. All right? Now, but that's not where the power comes from, according to Brzezinski. Here's where it comes from. Rome's imperial power derived from an important psychological reality. I am a Roman citizen. The exalted status of the Roman citizen was an expression of cultural superiority. That's the key word, cultural superiority. That's how you have power. How you get cultural superiority? Cultural superiority taken for granted by rulers, we know we're superior, conceded by the subjugated. Who's the subjugated? Black folk. You concede, yes, you are superior. And my only job is to get some of that superiority. Just please, Master, let me in your classes so I can learn Russian, so I can learn to speak French, so I can learn to do whatever and whatever. We ain't finished yet. As I said, this is the genius of all of them. Brzezinski says this: the overseas British Empire was initially acquired through a combination of exploration and then trade and then conquest. I might add in that order. But much of its Roman and Chinese predecessors or its French and Spanish rivals, it also derived a great deal of its staying power from the perception of British cultural superiority. That's how they ruled the world. How could you send 1,000 people out and control a continent unless you had something other than guns? You couldn't even shoot at all the people. But if you can control the thinking, cultural superiority successfully asserted, quietly conceded, had the effect of reducing the need to rely on large military forces to maintain the power of the imperial center. That's the advice given to Jimmy Carter now, not to George Bush. Y'all still with me? This is Brzezinski still. Because of these domestic factors, the American global system emphasizes the technique of co-optation. How do you control the world? Co-op. Co-op what? Reinforced by massive but intangible impact of American domination of global communications, newspapers, television, music. Look what he said. Popular entertainment. Now do you wonder why BET had to have 50 cents and not Dead Prez? Have we figured it out yet? We don't run and own BET. In fact, we don't run and own any major media. Why? Because you have to co-opt popular entertainment and communication and mass culture by the tangible clout of your technological edge, and because you got a military to back it up. Still talking about how to control the world. Haven't come to your part yet. Your part's coming up. So cultural domination has been an underappreciated facet of America's global power. American television program and film account for 3/4 of the global market, and popular music is equally dominant, while American fads, eating habits, even clothing are increasingly imitated worldwide. As the imitation of American ways gradually pervades the world, it creates a more congenial setting for the exercise of the indirect, seemingly consensual American hegemony. That means domination. The goal is not democracy. That hegemony involves a complex structure of interlocking institutions and procedures designed to generate consensus and obscure asymmetries in power and influence. Now, here's where you come in. This is after the book is almost over. For America, the chief geopolitical prize is Eurasia. For half a millennium, world affairs were dominated by Eurasian powers and people who fought with one another for regional domination in the middle of the chessboard. Iraq, Iran, Syria, Egypt, Italy, places like France and so forth, the Mediterranean. That's the chessboard. Everybody else is on the edge and they have less power because of the crossroads of commerce and communication and so forth. But look, come down here. In that context, how America manages Eurasia is critical. Eurasia is the globe's largest continent and geopolitically axial. A power that dominates Eurasia will control 2 of the 3 of the world's most advanced and economically productive region. And here you are. A mere glance at the map also suggests that control over Eurasia would almost automatically entail Africa's subordination. I'm reading from the lesson plan. That's Brzezinski's lesson plan. A little earlier, I was reading from Huntington's lesson plan. A little earlier, I was reading from Kotkin's lesson plan. The one thing they all agree, they may disagree on whether there's 5 civilizations or 3, but they don't disagree on domination. And they don't disagree that culture is the way to domination. Now, what are 1 billion Africans supposed to do in a world where the game is cultural integrity? And where there's a culture war on your ability to have cultural integrity. That means awareness and knowledge of self. That people will do whatever they can. They'll shut down every black studies program when it gets to the point that they're producing the information that informs Africans about themselves. Why? Because you want to preempt their capacity to resist when you come for what it is that they have. Right now, Africa is being recolonized as I stand here. Everybody's coming. You know how I know? Because the missionaries are on their way back. Which missionaries? The ones that go with the Marines. I'm not talking about you. You're not over there yet. Well, actually, this church is. But most of the churches that ought to be over there, they're not there. The ones that are over there are people that don't like you here. And now they're over there changing Africa's mind, teaching them cultural inferiority and the cultural superiority of their peers. So that's Brzezinski. I won't go through this one. A book called The Broderbund, just tell you to get it. Williams, Ivor and Hans Stridham and Williams. That's not set up there right. Stridham and Williams. The Broderbund. This is the secret think tank that ran South Africa. What did they do? They used culture to control the South Africans, especially language. And the war, the first one, when the Children's War came, Soweto, that was about teaching the children in Afrikaans. It was about culture. They said, we won't teach you calculus unless you learn it in Afrikaans. You can't learn that in Zulu. You can't learn that in Xhosa. You have to learn it in a European language of the minority. And then, of course, a summative book on all of this you want to get, because this really is the engine of popular information about the culture wars today. This is where Bill Bennett is housed. This is where the guy who wrote The Bell Curve is housed. This is where Clarence Thomas got coached. This is the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, the Manhattan Foundation, the Hoover Institution, the Bradley Foundation, the Olin Institution, United Parcel Foundation. Are these names familiar to us as a people? Since they have so much interest in us as a people, why wouldn't we know who the people are who have an active agenda directed toward us? And why wouldn't we know what their lesson plan is? And if we don't know what their lesson plan is, how in the world will we ever counter that lesson plan when they say it means subjugation for us? I'm reading their words. Those weren't my words that I was reading. I'm going to skip this one. This is on the bell curve. I probably ought to read at least one little quote from here. Now, let me read a couple. Raise your hand if you read the bell curve. Okay, that's not enough. See, I'm not the minute to embarrass anybody. You in this book. You all over this book. This book has chapter 21 and 22. That's the chapter you're supposed to read. That's how easy it is to read this book. Forget the charts and the statistics. You don't need the charts or the statistics. Chapter 21 and 22.
That's really unique.
Yeah, the last
that a book
is the public policy chapters. When they say what the bell curve means, that's what you want to hear. Let me tell you why. Remember I said malignant attention. In the case of the United States, the threat comes from an underclass that has been with American society for some years. Any doubt about who is meant by the underclass? Okay, I just want to be sure. Okay, people in the bottom quartile of intelligence are becoming not just increasingly expendable in economic terms, they will sometimes in the not too distant future become a net drag. In economic terms, and barring a profound change in direction for our society, many people will be unable to perform that function so basic to human dignity of putting more into the world than they take out. For many people, there's nothing they can learn that will repay the cost of their teaching. Let's do another one so you get an idea of how grave this thing is. This is actually being said in think tanks now as the foundation for the policy in health care, education, and all of those things. They're already saying here, education is useless for 1/4 of the population, and we're in that 1/4. Most of us are in that. Now, here's one of the solutions. In short, by custodial state, which he recommends, we have in mind a high-tech and more lavish version of the Indian reservation for some substantial minority of the nation's population, while the rest of America tries to go about its business. In its less benign form, the solutions will become more and more totalitarian. But benign or otherwise, going about its business in the old sense will not be possible. It is difficult to imagine the United States preserving its heritage of individualism and equal rights before the law, of free people running their own lives, once it is accepted that a significant part of the population must be made permanent wards of the state. If we are to avoid this prospect for the future, we cannot count on the natural course of events to make things come out right. Can y'all read code? Do you know that's what was said in 1930s when Hitler was coming to power in Germany, when they started talking about Jews as worthless people? When people get named worthless, they get burned in ovens when they are thought to be a net drag. You say, that was back in the day. That was back in the day? It's right now. The same spirit that drove that is present right now. Look at all your look at what's happening to health care. Look at the budget that just got passed. Already people don't have health care. They're cutting the budget in health care. Now I'm gonna let it go. I got a couple more. Not much, dude. a couple more. All right. I'm only going to do this one because it's fast, and the exhibit for King Tutankhamun is coming around. Anybody seen the exhibit? Anybody know what the controversy is? Everything I'm talking about is life and death for African people. But do you know I can't get any of the organizations I'm in to spend a couple hours learning some of this information I'm sharing with you right now? You know that? Do you know that the leadership that needs to know these things so that they could make correct strategies? They're chasing false issues. People throw up any kind of issue at us, and we're down the street on the false issue, and we're letting the life and death issue go. So this one is coming up. Why am I going back to Egypt? I'm going back to Egypt because Europeans live in Egypt. Egypt is critical to them. It may not be important to you, but it's critical to them. What's happening? Well, here's what's happening. These people, this is a quick summary of who the ancient Egyptians were. On the right, the mummies of the royals, the kings and queens. Not going through all of them. The mama of the man in question, King Tutankhamun. The brother of the man in question himself, King Tutankhamun. 25 years ago, he came to Los Angeles and then across the United States in an exhibit. He's getting ready to go to Florida. I'm getting ready to go to Florida. Have this little conversation about it because they claim he's a white man now. All right? How do they do it and why do they do it? These are the foreigners over here, just for your information. That's Alexander the Great. This is Cleopatra VII, who followed him, the granddaughter of one of his generals. This is Nefertiti, who was the older foreigner from Persia, just in case sisters went out and bought those necklaces with Nefertiti's on them, thinking that you were buying an African woman. You were not. You were buying a Persian woman who is modeled as if she were an African woman by Europeans who want the Africans who built pyramids to be white. We want the people who built pyramids to be non-African and white. So that's why they're coming after Tutankhamun. Why? Because this is one of the blackest mothers on the continent in Egypt at that time. And this is one of the clearest images of an African phenotype that you can find. So if you can attack that one and destroy it, then all the doubtful images you can own, then you can interpret Egypt as not African and take that technological achievement away from it. That's what the thing is about, and then claim it for Europe. That's basically where they're headed. So let's, real quick. This is the grandmother of that whole dynasty with her little nappy head cornrows. Y'all see that? Tete Sherry. And this is the man who pulled the main, Cheikh Anta Diop on the left, the man who pulled the main information together on the physical evidence for the phenotype of the Africans. And that's his student, Obinga. These are the two men, and that's their 11 arguments. I'm not going to go through them. They argued in 1974 and shut down debate on whether Egypt was black or white. 11 different ways they proved it, and they shut the conference down. All the top Egyptologists who thought they had something to say had nothing to say when they finished in 1974. So now they're trying to sneak in under the door. Not with a conference of academics, but with Hollywood. And the first thing you need to know is you can go back as far as you want to the earliest images. They're all black in the Nile Valley. All the kings who built pyramids, all the things that they built, all the pharaohs, all the writers, all the main dynastic kings up to and including the dynasty 12 That's the 12th family. I've skipped past a couple thousand years in just what I just said in the last sentence or so to get to the one that has Tutankhamun in it. They had mathematics up to and including pre-calculus, trigonometry, geometry, algebra, all of that in 2,000 years before the birth of Christ. The oldest university building in the world, Ipeti Sut University, and that's the logo. And this 18th dynasty then controls the known world, everything inside the white square. And these, again, are the royal, but this time I put all the women on one page so you could see the hairdos right now that you recognize right now. This one here, the locked up hair. This one here, the braids with the extensions. This one here almost looked like she got a hot comb treatment. This mama here with a nappy head cornrow, Tetisheri, Nefertari, not Nefertiti, and the mother of Tutankhamun, Queen T. This is her scholarly image, or her carving there. And the men, the main kings of the 18th dynasty. This is the dynasty that they're trying to make inroads in and to turn it white. Those are the early dynastic figures that predate King Tutankhamun, his grandparents, Queen Hatshepsut, and the things that they built. Some of the kings, again, this time not mummies, but carvings. And then finally, Nefertiti, the foreign queen, with her husband Akhenaten, who is the brother of Tutankhamun. Some people say the uncle of Tutankhamun, and the mama. And the brother of Akhenaten. I'm skipping past some of these. And one of the first attempts for a makeover was the cartoon of King Tutankhamun here, the mummy here, the golden mask here, and the cartoon here. By the way, this says the video game you waited 3,000 years to see. Turn him into a white man, right? Okay, let's see what else they do. And so now, what they did, they said, everybody in the world is going to be impressed by a piece of scientific equipment, the CAT scan. Some of you had CAT scans. I had a CAT scan one time. And that's an impressive thing. You lay up in there like you're in a coffin and it goes all over your body and it gives a picture without taking surgery. So they put that CAT scan on the mummy and they said, okay, now we're going to give the results to 3 different teams of forensic reconstruction people so that they can tell us what the mummy looked like when he was living and had skin on it and all of that. And so this is what they did. They gave the CAT scan of this mummy to the Americans who didn't know who the mummy was, and they came up with this image. They gave the Egyptians the same CAT scan, and independently, they came up with this image. And then they gave the French the mummy, and they came up with this image. Which image do you think they picked? Yep, they picked the French. Now, the point is this. Let's take a look. If CAT scan is a scientific procedure more accurate than the artists who were eyewitnesses, they just hung themselves. Because if it's science and not art, all 3 teams are supposed to get the same image. They don't. Those things are widely different from each other. So here the science that's supposed to bring closure makes it even worse if you pay attention. And of course, they're not paying attention. And so they chose the one that looked the whitest of the reconstruction. They give him legitimacy by putting him on the National Geographic magazine, and they give him legitimacy by having the director and from Cairo, Zawi Hawass, to come with the exhibit. And then to propaganda, they beat the drums for this, not through an academic peer review process for what they found. They beat the drums through a Hollywood campaign to try to prove to people that this new image is better than the golden mask, for example, or better than the mummy itself. And so this is the image, the CAT scan over here where the mummy's in the CAT scan, and then they get this, and clearly everybody's happy to have a white image for Tutankhamun, because if you can do that for Tutankhamun, imagine what you do for everybody else. That's what we say. So we're going to have some fun. Dr. Obenga and I are going to be down at the museum in Fort Lauderdale in a couple weeks, I think it is, to have a little debate about this. So we're going to see what kind of stuff people got. Okay. Now I got quite a few of these though. I can show this because there's only one slide. This is Elizabeth Middleton's poem called Encyclopedia. Some of the biggest lies ever told have been bound with leather, printed with gold. Careful, black child, what you read. Books are bags full of seeds, waiting for the place and time to sprout inside a fertile mind. Eager eyes or vigilant eyes will pierce the scheme to deify the European. That's what false scholarship has been doing and is still trying to do. One more, we'll wrap this up. Okay, there's another one that I wanted to do. I want to do this one because this is. Anybody remember this? Anybody remember seeing the pictures of this? Everybody. This is when the brothers stood up on the Olympics and got their gold medal and silver medal, bronze medal, I guess. And John Carlos is being interviewed about that. John Carlos was the one on the left of the stand. See, his left hand is raised. I wanted to show you somebody who is not inside the Matrix. But the Matrix. The Matrix is the goggles that you wear. Anybody played the video game where you put on goggles and you think that you're driving that car at breakneck speed and everything, or you think you're in that war shooting people and all of that? You know, so might get you got glasses on. The person on the outside, they can see you in the Matrix. But for you're looking through the glasses that's projecting virtual reality. We live as African people in the Matrix, virtual reality. Black woman wrote the book that the Matrix was based on, those movies. You take the red pill and one out. Even if you don't know what's going to happen, you want to stay in Egypt, you take the blue pill. And the blue pill says, well, we're going to keep feeding you, let you stick around. But you take that red pill, you're on your own. And that can be scary. A lot of people don't want to get out of the Matrix. So there's some brothers that were never in the Matrix. And I want you to see it from the time that they did this and what was on their mind. Can you imagine getting a medal and the world is watching and you ain't nothing but an athlete? That's a dumb athlete. Y'all heard that before? Well, listen to this. Interviewer. Many people call that period of the 60s the revolt of the black athlete. Why? John Carlos. I think Sports Illustrated started that phase. I don't think of it as the revolt of the black athlete. It was the revolt of the black man. Athletics was my occupation. I didn't do what I did as an athlete. I raised my voice in protest as a man. I was fortunate enough to grow up in the era of Dr. King, Paul Robeson, baseball players like Jackie Robinson, Campanella, who come to my dad's shop on 142nd and Lenox. I could see they were treated like black athletes. I would ask myself, why is this happening? Racism meant that none of us could truly have our day in the sun without education, housing, and employment. We would lose what I call, look at here, familyhood. That's the cultural unity. If you can't give up your wife or son or daughter, if you can't give them what they need, after a while you try to escape who you are. That's why people turn to drugs and why our communities have been destroyed, and that's why there was a revolt. I can see the interviewer now. He said, well, that wasn't exactly what I was expecting. He said, when you woke up that morning in 1968, did you know you were going to make your historic gesture on the medal stand, or was it spontaneous? Carlos, it was in my head the whole year. We first tried to have a boycott to get all the black athletes to boycott the Olympics, but not everyone was down with that plan. A lot of athletes thought that winning medals would supersede or protect them from racism. But even if you won the medal, it ain't gonna save your mama. It ain't gonna save your sister or your children. It might give you 15 minutes of fame, but what about the rest of your life? I'm not saying that they didn't have the right to follow their dreams, but to me the medal was nothing but the carrot on a stick. The interviewer, at the last track meet before the Olympics, we left it that every man would do his own thing. You had to choose which side of the fence you were on. You had to say, I'm for racism or I'm against racism. I'm sorry, that's the other, I think that's the other athlete. Carlos, we stated that we were going to do something, but Tommy and I didn't know what we were going to do until we got into the tunnel on the way to the race. We had gloves, black shirts, and beads, and we decided in that tunnel that if we were going to go out on that stand, we were going to go out barefooted. Okay? Now, why did they do that? Why barefooted? Carlos, we wanted the world to know that in Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Central Los Angeles, Chicago, that people were still walking back and forth in poverty without even the necessary clothes to live. We have kids that don't have shoes even today. It's not like the powers that be can't do it, can't provide those things. They can send a spaceship to the moon or send a probe to Mars, and yet they can't give shoes. They can't give health care. I'm just not naive enough to accept that. Interviewer. I'm just poverty without even the necessary clothes to live. We have kids poverty without even the necessary clothes to live. We have kids that don't have shoes even today. It's not like the powers that be can't do it, can't provide those things. They can send a spaceship to the moon or send a probe to Mars, and yet they can't give shoes. They can't give health care. I'm just not naive enough to accept that. Interviewer, why did you wear beads on the medal stand? Carlos, the beads were for those individuals that were lynched or killed that no one said a prayer for. They were hung and tarred. It was for those thrown off the side of the boat in the middle passage. All that was in my mind. We didn't come up there with any bombs. We were trying to wake the country up and to wake the world up too. DZ, how did your life change when you took that step onto the podium? Carlos, my life changed prior to the podium. I used to break into freight trains by Yankee Stadium when I was young. Then I changed. When I realized I was a force in track and field, I realized I didn't have to break into freight trains. I wanted to wake up the people who work and run the trains so that they can seize what they deserve. It's like these supermarkets in Southern California that are on strike. They always have extra milk, and they throw it in the river or dump it in the garbage, even though there are people without milk. They say, we can't give it to you, so we would rather throw it away. Something is very wrong. Realizing that changed me a long time before 1968. And then, DZ, what kind of harassment did you face when you got back home? John Carlos, I was with Dr. King 10 days before he died. He told me he was sent a letter that said there was a bullet with his name on it. I remember looking into his eyes to see if there was any fear, and there was none. He didn't have any fear. He had love, and that in itself changed my life in terms how I would go into battle. I would never have fear for my opponent, but love for people I was fighting for. That's why if you look at the picture of the raised fist, Tommy has his jacket zipped up. but mine was open. I was representing shirt workers, blue-collar people, and underdogs. That's why my shirt was open. Those are the people whose contributions to society are so important, but don't get recognized. And finally, many people say athletes should just play and not be heard. What do you say to that? JC, those people should put all their millions of dollars together and make a factory that builds athlete robots. Athletes are human beings. We have feelings too. How can you ask someone to live in the world, to exist in a world, and not have something to say about injustice? What message do you have to the new generation of athletes hitting the world stage? First of all, athletes, black, red, brown, yellow, and white, need to do some research on their history, their own personal family. They need to find out how many people in their family were maimed in a war. They need to find out how hard their ancestors had to work. They need to uncloud their mind with materialism and money and study their history. And then they need to speak up. You got to step up to society when it's letting all its people down. Just a dumb athlete. Isn't that something? Finally, y'all saw that, y'all saw Kanye West do a whole lot of things. And my happiest was in the Katrina, when he told the truth at that time. But they've been beating up on him because he was on the cover of a magazine with the crown of thorns on it. And they said, you know, how could you be blasphemous enough to put yourself up and impersonate Jesus Christ? I don't think Kanye was doing that. But what I did was I went back and I found out that these are the oldest images of Christ that exist. These come out of the catacombs. This is the oldest right here. This one and this one. These two are about the same. They're in the 200s BC, or AD, 200s AD, which is in the Roman catacomb. You can't, if you find a picture older than these of Christ, I want to see it. So I'm not telling a false story about this. But, and by the way, Mel Gibson knew that these were the oldest images. But as much as he said he didn't want to lie, and he made Jesus speak Aramaic in that film, he lied because he knew in the film that he narrated called The Faith, these images are in there. So he didn't have a black man play Christ. Okay, and then Christ had a black mama. Either the figure that's the prototype before Christ, which is Isis and Horus, or the Madonna and Child. All the early Madonnas and Child was a black mother and a black baby. And there's another one that an Italian lady asked me to write a reference for. I can't think of it now. Dark Mother, that's the name of the book. A new one out. She said, I can't find nothing but Black Mary and Black Jesus. The earlier I get. That's what she said. So I thought of all of that, and then I made this nice little collage. Why not Kanye? I mean, this is Rembrandt over here. And Rembrandt, he's over 1,000 years too late to know what Christ looked like. But this is the one, we'll accept this one, even in black churches. Even in black churches, we'll accept that one. And why will we accept that image, but we can't find it to believe that somebody who looked like Kanye might actually also have looked like Christ? Well, here's why. The last slide I will show you. Because we live in a matrix. That's why. Not just white people live in a matrix. They built one for us too. And we don't even want the key to it. We just want a good place in it. And especially if we could be in one, a cell next to theirs. We would like that. And this is the image of us in the matrix. We need to take the glasses off. To take the glasses off. To take the red pill in order to be able to have our passport out not to see whether we're going to get hurt or not, but to see what's true or not. Because the one who knows the truth shall make them free. White people in the Matrix have taken the church and turned Jesus into the shrewd businessman for Halliburton and Cheney. Jesus, CEO, the manager. These are the books they're reading. You know, they found everything to do but saving the sick and the homeless and so forth. They want to be the CEO to make billions for Hillard. They're in the Matrix. That's what most of us want, is to get in the Matrix where they are. To deify the European. How about going back to where we used to be, Sankofa? Thank you.
Before Dr. Hillard goes back to sign his books, and this is light reception for those of you who gathered, we have time, the mics in each of these aisles, we have time for a couple of questions for you to address him, please. If you have a question, come to one of the mics. Is it on, Hunter? Is it on? It might not be on.
Since 2004, and the author is John Perkins. The name of the book is called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He was just here Friday at Transitions Bookstore to an audience of 200 people. Anyone who's been in the bookstore knows that's a small place. I strongly urge you to pick up Confessions of an Economic Hitman, because he outlines the process by which certain corporations, corporatocracy as he calls it, extracts wealth out of foreign countries. And I asked him, he talks about what happened in Panama, Ecuador, Saudi Arabia, and so forth. But I asked him, I said, now in one sentence in the book, which kind of forced him to quit, he said, with the ascendancy of a new CEO to this consulting firm called Maine, Charles A. Maine Incorporated, folks never heard of that this guy was in charge of the domestic program. So there's a domestic economic hit program targeted to certain communities. So I asked him, I said, are you talking about something like Enron, for example? He said, oh yeah, Enron was a domestic hit program targeting middle-class Americans to extract the wealth out of their communities. I said, what about the relief to Hurricane Katrina and Rita? He said, yes, you look at who the contractors are. It's just like in Iraq. And so that book is going to be out at the end of the year. So I strongly recommend you pick up that, because you'll get some insights into why we stay in the economic position that we stay in. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It's not like James Fry, a million little pieces. He was there. He submit, then we send the jackals. And if the jackals can't get you, then they send the military. And we really have to understand this whole geopolitical situation that's happening here, because we're in it. And if we don't understand it, we'll be victimized by it. And the last point is that we're not helpless as a people. We can fight corporations. Or one organization I'm part of, the National African American Tobacco Prevention Network, successfully fought Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company and forced a large settlement and shut down their efforts to use hip-hop to get our children as smokers. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and that's a whole nother talk, and there's a lot of people.
Thank you. Oh, over here, okay.
Barbara Hillard, it's a pleasure to see you again. I was wondering if you could speak to, in keeping with the theme of the Matrix, what role religion has played with regard to the perpetuation of that status for us as black people here in America specifically. Now, mind you, when I say religion, I'm talking about something completely different from what it means to know Christ, but specifically the role of religion with regard to where we are in terms of how we think as black people.
I had one more PowerPoint I was going to put up on conflict of minds, which looks at the role that a religion or a set of religion played in South Africa. And that was Jordan K. Nubani, who was an ambassador to the United States from South Africa. But you have religion playing two different parts. Martin Luther King was a religious figure, so he fights a battle of liberation. He challenged materialism, white supremacy, and militarism, which may be why he went out as fast as he did. On the other hand, starting with the Nicene Council, you had a politician that hijacked the Nicene and formed the Nicene Council, King Constantine. And so he took people's spiritual beliefs and specifically the organized structure. That's usually what people do, is take over organized structure and turn them into political tools for the domination of other people. That happened with the Inquisition. That happened with the Crusades. In fact, the Bushes started calling the Iraq War a crusade, and that has some very special meaning. So what you find is that either good people or evil people can take over any structure and make it work toward their end. So it's not possible to give one answer to that question. I'd have to know which circumstances and under what conditions.
Thank you, Dr. Delia, for today. I'm Dr. Jacqueline Witherspoon, and I've been trained in pediatrics. But when I had my own family, I was trained in pediatrics enough to take time out for my own. And I ended up in some careers that allowed me to spend more time with my children. And one of them was a crew leader for the census for the government. I was initially what's called an enumerator, where you go door to door and you interview households and you ask them about their ethnicity and you do statistics as such. And we were trained, okay, I became a crew leader to train other people, but we were trained to, like you said, when they don't give you a culture, they call you white. So Latinas are actually being statistically registered as white because they saw that in 2018, Latinas were going to be the number one in population. So what they did was they changed the criteria. And now whites will continue to be the majority. You're not going to see that projection come to reality because of this statistical game that has been played. And people just don't realize those are the things that are going on when you're talking about. So when you say, and it just hit me hard when you say, to nullify a group by making them non-ethnic. it's just astronomical. But, you know, it's not just someone causing propaganda by saying, yes, they're not counting you or they're counting this group in to count you out more. It's really happening. It's happening, and it's happening now.
Thank you very much. It's a very excellent comment, and I'll just make this added comment because she expressed everything that needed to be expressed, is that in that case, in the case of Latinos, Hispanics, those names, ask yourself the question, who came up with the name? Did that family get together and decide on who they were and call themselves, for example, Hispanic? In the case of Hispanics, definitely no. The government came up with that category. And then people either buy in or buy out of it. Now, interestingly, that category, either Hispanic or Latino, has Africans inside it, you know, who happen to speak Spanish or have Spanish names. So is that whole group white or black or something else?
And that is my point. Yeah. Latino was no longer on there as an option.
They took it off.
It's no longer an option. Okay. It's white with Mexican background, white with Spanish background. You know what I'm saying? But it's still white when all the numbers come in, and they will still be the majority.
Right. See, I know that they weren't going to have you working around there too long because you took the red pill. You start asking the wrong questions. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Yolanda Clay, and I'm a student here. I'm getting my PhD in religion and science. And so my question goes back to your discussion about the bell curve. And in the larger discussion then, what is going on in the fields of genomics and race. I can't help but say I'm deeply concerned that we don't have enough people representing us in fields of science in our best interest. And also, being that I don't know of many people who are doing research in this area, it's difficult for me to find resources and or create an agenda that I think would be good for the community. So I guess my question is, how can this become a concern of ours before it's too late?
See, I got an email from Hunter day before yesterday, or maybe it was yesterday, last night, where there's this meeting about animals. Y'all know what animals are? It's the genetic combination, genes from humans and genes from animals to make a animal. So it's not a person, it's not an animal, it's an animal. In other words, the people who are into genetics, as the sister said, without a value system, have free reign to do whatever it is that they choose to do. And if you ask the question, are our interests being protected? The answer is no, for the simple reason that either we're not there in any numbers, that's part of the truth, but the other part of the truth is that we may be there in numbers without consciousness. So unless we have critical consciousness, knowing who we are, we won't be able to represent our interests even if we are there. So that right now we're in a very vulnerable position because this genome thing has taken off like a big bird just in the last decade. It's awesome, the kind of information that's been amassed and the things that are being done with genetic engineering from food. I mean, you might as well, what's the name for a combination of human and turnip? You know, for hunnup or something like that, because they're putting human genes in food. You know, putting pig genes in humans and in food. They're doing all kinds of things, and there's nobody that can say you can't do this if you don't have a value system that comes out of a spiritual tradition of some kind and a moral tradition of some kind. If you say anything goes tradition, which is the tradition, free, you know, laissez-faire, that's the tradition that we have, then you can be sure people are going to do whatever it is they can do. And you may never know it until the animal comes for you.
That's really scary. My name is Deion Fleming. I'm a senior at Chicago State. person to person, people to people. Where does it start? How do we get our young people to understand that they're royalty from Egypt? Where do those roots start? How can someone who's never been taught those roots, how can we get it in their heads just to be able to start getting that seed?
Quick answer.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
That's actually a question that deserves a lot of time. But the quick answer is that we can do whatever we want to do. That we have not failed in challenging a system. We have not tried. If we try and then fail, that's one problem. But if we don't even think to try and then don't mobilize to try, then we can't do anything. So no, we could actually win. It's that with everybody controlling everything, we could still win, and we could win in a big way, provided we knew where it was that we were going. How do we do that? That's the second part of your question, is that you have to take charge of the socialization of your people. And right now, we don't have control over the socialization because we're not asking for it. In fact, we're demanding that the control be given over to people who don't respect us, in some cases don't like us, and we just haven't done our part on that. But when I say our people, you notice I didn't say our children only. I said our people as a whole. Many of our adults have to be re-socialized right now in order to be the parents and the grandparents that they can be for the children. Many of the children are ready right now. The knuckleheads are ready right now. You know, the ones, I'm telling you, you go into the prison and some of the ones you call knuckleheads, they went there because they're knuckleheads. Go find out what those young men are ready for right now. Go to the Atlanta pen and follow around Tupac Shakur's dad, who was in that pen, and then see what kind of advice he has about what appeals to those young people, and then follow up on some of the things that have been done, and you'll see. And the thing that got me this morning in church, I don't know how many were here in church this morning, but tears came to my eyes as I saw this whole row filled up with young people. Over half of them were young boys, the very ones that you say don't want to come. So they're ready for us, and why I think that they came. I think those young boys came because of what they heard. I think they heard the truth, and they say, somebody's speaking truth, we want to be here. And I think that that's where most of them are. The ones that I talk to say that.
Over here.
Speaking about truth, we've always heard untruths through white supremacy, that we were a cursed people, about the Hamitic curse. Pastor Wright has always taught us that it wasn't a curse from God. It actually came from Noah, who was in a drunken stupor, who said, "Curse be Canaan." My question is, has there been a curse on our people? And I think the reason why I ask this question is that I think, in my mind, that the powers that be don't want us to know about the truth behind the curse. Because if you're going to talk about the truth behind the curse, you have to talk about our greatness as a people, as we once were, our fall, and to talk about it from that standpoint. So the main question is, has there been a curse on us as a people? And if so, I think you've already addressed it, how we can get up out of it. What more would you add to what you've already said?
Until somebody can show me where God did it, I'm gonna have to say no. You know, there's no curse that God gave to anybody. In fact, at least most of the spiritual traditions that I know don't have that in them. That comes, you have to do the history of the curse. You know, when did the curse appear? And then who were the people that advocated the curse? You know, and most of the stories about that particular curse are associated with somebody who misinterpreted the Old Testament. You know, I remember there was one of the professors from ITC that used to give lectures on the Noah curse. He'd ask people, everybody raise your hand who's heard that Ham got cursed. And then the hands will almost always go up. Well, even if you believed in the curse, that's not what's in the Bible. He said people actually believed that they could go to the Bible and find that Ham got cursed. If there was a curse, the curse didn't come from God, it came from Noah. And if it came from Noah, he was drunk. And the curse was on Canaan, not Ham at all. So now you got to find out who Canaan was, and then you have to find out who Ham was, if that really is a true story in the first place. But to do the history of the story is a very important thing. And most of the time you'll find some greedy dog made up that curse and then blame God for the curse that they made up. So no, I don't acknowledge the curse in my life unless somebody else can find another reason for it.
Last three over here.
Dr. Hillard, you're working. Clarence Fitch, professor at a neighboring college, Chicago State University. And the interest that our department has in educational leadership is the work at improving from kindergarten through the doctoral level. Right. The improvement of students' attendance in school, behavior, of course, achievement. So I intend to buy your book on young, black, and gifted because you use that word achievement in there. And so one of the departments at our university has a grant now. They're working with South Africa on helping them with the development of textbooks. That inspires me to say, well, what about some other areas that our department might have an interest in? What are some of the other needs that put us closer to doing something with a country like South Africa and some of their needs that we have the expertise to help?
I wish we could start the presentation now. That's an incredibly important question. You know, the whole business of what we do in education. Let me say this. In the Matrix, the people who designed the Matrix have as one of their components colleges and universities in behavioral and professional studies. And in that matrix, thank you, in that matrix, framing the question can get you in trouble. You know, for example, we've got a college, in fact, I'm embarrassed to say sometime, I went to Africa to help Africans with education. Since that time, I've learned so much about what Africans know about education that's so profound that it's almost embarrassing even to presume that you got something to offer to them. You know, it's really, read the book Kindizi, The Congo Art of Babysitting by Foucault, for example, or African Cosmology of the Bantu Congo by Foucault, or Conflict of Minds by Jordan K. Nubani, or read After God, Then Dibia, and I can't think of that author's name for the moment. But what I'm saying is that what I've been trying to do is to get with the elders